If there's one thing us libertarians are experts at, it's complaining about government. We are constantly criticising its ever-expanding role in society. We talk of its immense power and influence over our personal lives. We talk of how it controls and distorts the monetary system on which our economy relies. And of course we talk about how it steals an ever-increasing portion of our money. But what actually is government? People all around the world take different views on what government is and isn't. Some say government is the name for things we do together. Other people say government is a body of officials working together for the national interest. Others say that we are the government, but to get things done we elect representatives to work on our behalf. For anyone interested in social, political and economic issues, it is important to have a clear understanding of what the government is. To start with, let's address the most common misconception, that we are the government. As Rothbard states, if we are the government, then anything the government does to an individual is not only just and untyrannical, but also voluntary on the part of the individual concerned. If a government throws a man into jail for dissident opinion, then he is doing it to himself. If it conscripts a man, he is conscripting himself. Under this reasoning, any Jews murdered by the Nazi government were not murdered, instead they must have committed suicide, since they were the government, and therefore anything done to them by the government was voluntary. Seeing this absurd logic laid out by Rothbard, we must conclude that we are not the government, and the government does not in any accurate sense represent the majority of the people. But regardless, even if the government did represent the majority of the people, it would still not justify its actions. If one person steals another person's wallet, then it is rightly considered theft. If two people agree to steal someone's wallet, then it is still theft. In fact, no matter how many people get together and agreed to steal someone's wallet, it would still be theft. So even if 90% of the population vote in an election to kill the remaining 10%, this would still be murder. No electoral mandate can ever change this fact. Legality is not the same as morality. So now we have addressed what the state is not, we can move on to looking at what the state is. Briefly put, the state is that organisation in society that maintains a monopoly on the use of force in a given territorial area. In particular, it is the only societal organisation that obtains its income not through voluntary exchange or provision of services, but by coercion. All other individuals and institutions gain revenue through the voluntary exchange of goods and services, which mutually benefit both parties. The state, however, uses the threat of jail, backed by the police and military, to extract an income via compulsion. Through these same institutions they also regulate and control every other aspect of our lives. German sociologist Franz Oppenheimer argues there are only two ways of obtaining income. The primary way he calls the economic means. This entails the voluntary production and exchange of goods and services. It is aimed at avoiding conflict and maximising satisfaction of all parties involved. The second and completely opposite way he calls the political means. The political means are involuntary. They are confiscation, coercion and theft of others' property. It is parasitic as it creates nothing and simply siphons off wealth to the political class. In the long run, this is a self-destructing means as it dwindles and eliminates its own supply. Oppenheimer argued that the state is the organisation of political means and the systemisation of this process over a given area. Rothbard said the state provides a legal, orderly, systematic channel for the predation of private property. It is obvious that the state is a unique social institution in its methods for both extracting income and carrying out its functions. Everyone accepts that the state is different from private business, so this begs the question, how does the state maintain its power when it is clearly identifiable as abnormal to the regular functions of society? In order to continue existing, the state must have the support of a majority of the population. This support, however, does not need to be active enthusiasm. It may well be passive resignation, as long as there is a sense of acceptance. If there were to be any significant proportion of the population to actively resist, then the state and political class would quickly find themselves in a minority and be overthrown. One main method the state achieves support is through the creation of vested economic interests. These are a large group that enjoy support from a ruling class. In the past, these groups were the noble houses and the aristocracy, who were granted additional rights, lands and power, and in return they subdued the local populations and swore loyalty to the king. In modern days, the vested interests are the big businesses and unions, who gain exclusive control of entire industries through complex regulations, tariffs, subsidies and labour laws. However, even these vested interests are not enough to ensure widespread support. In order to convince the general population of the benevolence and necessity of government, ideological rhetoric must be utilised. This is where the intellectuals enter the situation. Intellectuals are the moulders of public opinion. This is exactly what the government requires, a moulding of public opinion towards supporting them. Here we can see the formation of an alliance between the intellectuals and the state, where the government guarantees a secure role in the state apparatus in return for the swaying of public opinion. Throughout history, one of the most successful arguments has been the divine right of kings. Here the church and religion taught that the king was chosen by God, and in some religions the ruler was God. Therefore any resistance or even criticism would be blasphemy. In today's more secular society, and with the rise of democracy, new arguments have had to be formed. The arguments most commonly employed to create support for government fall into two categories. The first argument is as follows: politicians and state officials are experts and geniuses who are required to make the complex decisions that will benefit us all. They are much wiser and greater than the simple and stupid common people. State rule, therefore, is seen as ultra-scientific. Rothbard wrote, "The increasing use of scientific jargon has permitted the state intellectuals to weave obscure apologia for the state rule that would only have been met with derision from the populace of a simpler age. A robber who justified his theft by saying that he really helped his victims by his spending giving a boost to retail trade would find few converts. But when this theory is clothed in Keynesian equations and impressive references to the multiplier effect, it unfortunately carries more conviction." The second argument states, "Rule by government is inevitable. It is necessary and far better for us than the chaos and disorder that would consume society if the state was ever to be overthrown." The state has been incredibly successful in this regard. The vast majority of people associate the word anarchy with rioters and looters who seek to burn civilization. They cannot imagine a society based off purely voluntary interaction. People are grateful to the government for protecting them from thieves, thugs and other violent criminals, whilst not realising that the government is the biggest criminal organisation to exist. The state also seeks to instill fear of other state leaders. Most people tend to love their homeland and community. By identifying the state with that homeland and community, natural patriotism works to the state's advantage. Next, we must understand how the state grows and expands beyond its limits, gaining new powers previously thought to be tyrannical. Throughout history, men have tried to place systems of checks and balances onto the state to limit its power, and one by one these limits have been overturned and used instead as stamps of approval justifying new powers. The divine right of kings was originally meant to hold kings to rule according to divine law. However, this was transformed into a rubber stamp of the divine approval of any and all actions a king could wish to take. Parliamentary democracy was intended to check against monarchical rule. However, Parliament evolved into a fundamental decision-making body in government and became sovereign in its actions. Even the US Constitution, perhaps the most thorough attempt at restricting government, in which written law interpreted by a supreme and supposedly independent judiciary, has become a rubber stamp of approval to state action. The Constitution now serves only to approve state action as just and unopposable. At the end of the line, one institution must have the final say on what is and isn't constitutional. Ultimately, this institution is part of a government, with a judiciary appointed by the executive and legislative branches. Therefore, understanding this, it is clear to see that the state has set itself up as the judge in its own case. It is the government judging government, and if it is allowed to determine its own limits of power, then this means government, not the constitution, is supreme. Finally, we will look at what the state fears. Fundamentally, the state fears any threat to its power. The major ways the state is overthrown is firstly through internal revolution from its citizens, and secondly by external conquest from another state. In short, these are war or revolution. Therefore, as these are the most dangerous scenarios, the state must spend a great deal of propaganda and money in preventing them. In the case of war with another country, the government must convince the citizens that it is not just an attack on the state and its rulers, but an attack on the whole population. Therefore, the government aims to persuade the citizens to fight to defend themselves, when in reality they are fighting to defend their rulers. If this persuasion fails, then the government relies on coercive conscription to fill the ranks of its armies. War, however, also provides great opportunities for the expansion of a state's power. It can conquer new territories, gain new resources, and eliminate other states which may have grown to pose a threat. Also, the state can grow its control over its own population during a time of war. War is described to its citizens as an emergency, when they must all come together as one to support the national effort. New regulations accompany this propaganda, and government is allowed to seize control over the economy and social life that in peacetime would be seen as tyrannical. However, the state's propaganda is so effective, most of the populace just shrug it off as working together for the survival of our country. Almost every war in modern history has left countries with reduced freedom and an increased bureaucracy. As Randolph Bourne wrote, "War is the health of a state." In conclusion, the state is that organisation that attempts to maintain a monopoly on the use of force in a given territorial area. It is parasitic, extracting its income by force and living off the wealth created by the productive economic means. It is always seeking new and further reaching powers, overcoming any restraints placed upon it. It seeks complete domination over its citizens and operates as nothing more than a mafia. When all is said and done, the greatest danger to the state is independent intellectual criticism. I will finish with a quote from Gerard Casey's book, Libertarian Anarchy. "States are criminal organisations, all states, not just the obviously totalitarian or oppressive ones. I intend for this statement to be understood literally and not as some form of rhetorical exaggeration." If you found this topic interesting and would like to learn more, then I would highly recommend reading Anatomy of a State by Rothbard, the book that inspired this video. There is a link in the description to a free PDF copy on the website of the Mises Institute. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed, then please like, comment and subscribe.